I've never had anybody reach back to me and say, you know, Dai, so I took your idea. I had this nice big luscious salad with some cedar plank salmon on it for lunch. I really regret doing that. Okay. Or, you know, I have a client and, you know, at the end of the day, I'm checking in with them. It's like, hey, how did the workout go today? And it's like, oh, you know, it went pretty well. I really regret doing it though, Dai. You know, like there's certain things that we just never, ever regret. Do more of those, okay? You know, and so when you look at certain things, like when you eat certain types of food, there's a certain fulfillment you get from it, you know, and really just start to take stock on what foods those are. What are the foods that keep you going well, keep you focused, keep your energy in a great place, you know, and do more.
Booyah, here we are with the few, getting pumped now, feeling like got to bring some extra energy to the table. I've done no exercise this morning. I'm having a massive drama trying to fit all of that into an incredibly hectic life. So I'm pumped today. Shawnee, how are you feeling this beautiful, fine winter's day or / autumn?
Absolutely great, mate. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. So it's really looking forward to it.
Yeah, the minute I start researching people like our guest today, I have this huge impact straight away, which is like, yeah, I need all that. I'm not doing that. That's a great idea. That's awesome. How can I do more? So I'm really pumped today. And I don't know whether this guest knows of the Australians' ability to murder vowels when it comes to names. And this awesome dude has got so many vowels in his name that we're going to create a gap between North American style language and Australian. But make him welcome all our guests there. This is someone who's super important, particularly for those that have kids, your parents. You've got a massively hectic lifestyle. You're a dude. You're getting older. Your metabolism's letting you down. Super stoked today to have Dai Manuel on the show today. Dai, g'day, mate. How are you? Welcome to the few.
Well, first of all, I'm so stoked to be here. That's another Canadian term. Stoked, in case you're wondering. You know, way across the pond. But I got to say, you know, just your intro, guys. How does that not just get you fired up? I've listened to that a couple times now, and I'm just like, man, I love the intro. It just sets the tone, right? And Boo,
mental priming.
I was going to say, and you just primed the show in a wonderful way. So yeah, I'm honored to be here. I'm just really looking forward to this. This is gonna be great.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for taking time.
And welcome, Dai. You know, it's great to have you here. And you know, same thing that as Boo said. You know, it's the same when I do research on any of our guests on the podcast here. It's like, wow, that's a really different or unique perspective. I haven't looked at things that way. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the way that you approach life. You have a you know, a bit of a model there that you run and that you've developed over time. And I'd love to you know, maybe get a little bit of story about, you know, where you've come from and how you ended up creating this model to I suppose live your life by as a man, as a husband, as a father, you know, in all the roles that you play in your life.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you. I mean, it's a great question. It's like it's a big question, right? Because when I think about it, it's like, yeah, it's taken me 44 years to get to this point, you know?
And Sean loves the big questions, mate. He loves them. He sits there, he unpacks them. He's like, how can I cram more into this? Boom. And
yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, where do I start? You know, like, because 44 years, it's funny, but it's so cliche, but it's gone by in a blink, right? Like, I'm just amazed. You know, I'll be 45 this fall, and I'm like, what the hell happened? Like, where did all this... Like, how did I get here? Because I'll tell you, there's been times where I questioned I'd ever make it to this far, you know, and I think we've all probably had some of those stories, and they might come up today. And, you know, when I was a teenager, I was morbidly obese. I was a big kid, and, you know, and I didn't get there by accident. And I think that's the thing about unhealth. You know, when we get into a state of unhealth where it's not like you wake up one day and it's like, oh, I'm like 150 pounds heavier than I should be. You know, it's like, pardon the pun, but a slow grow, right? Like it took some time, and it was literally from the age of 9 to 14, just eating a lot of calories that were poor in nutrition, but high in content. And on top of that, you know, movies and video games. I didn't move my body. So it just compounded, and my mindset, my physicality, it matched. It was literally non-existent. And I was very depressed and withdrawn. And, those are the early formative years where a lot of us, we start to come into, you start to see seeds of that person that we ultimately grow into as we start to mature and age and experience life. And it's a weird origin story from the standpoint, a lot of people that meet me or they creep me on social, if they're not familiar with the backstory, I'm someone that's been in the fitness space now for 26 years. And when I say that, I'm not a hobbyist. I mean, I make a full-time income and then some doing what I love, in lots of different capacities. And yet I didn't come to fitness naturally. It wasn't something where I woke up and I was like, yay, let's go work out. And even still to today, I would say, I was going to say, even today, it's not one of those things where I wake up and where I'm like, yay, I'm going to go and work out. There's those moments where I'm excited to move my body, but getting it started, it's not easy. And like I said, I'm 44 now. Things have changed a bit.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah. And if you're, during my formative years and as a kid, I was super athletic. Awesome. I did a lot of sport. And I guess I never really enjoyed it, but it was a case of, you got to win a race. Yep. That's the kind of school you're at. Everyone's doing it. And then as you leave, you just start to tail off. And then as you get older, particularly now, I think you value health more as you get older. You appreciate it. You understand that it is a bit harder to get going. And if you put good fuel in the body and you do good things, you're going to feel better. When did you have that realization, though? When was that moment when you went, I got to transition here? Because that is really hard. That is really hard. Not just to making the decisions easy, I guess, for like 2 days. But making the decision to make it sustainable is hard. How did you do that?
Dude, I love you, man. I gotta say, it is hard. I mean, change is hard, period. Like, let's be honest. We all get into our groove, right? We get into that sort of just mode of operating. And, for a lot of us, we wake up, we do what we do. We do a lot of cool stuff during the day, hopefully, things that fulfill us, make us feel a little bit happy or a little bit joyful that we're living these great lives. And then, we do it all again the next day. And we get into these patterns. And so patterns, especially the more pronounced they are and the deeper ingrained those paths are in our, just way of operating our life, the harder it is to get out of them, right? And to make those shifts. And trust me, at age 14, it wasn't like I was like, hey, I want to get fit. I mean, it got to that, but it wasn't until I reached what I felt was my rock bottom, and even when I think back on it, I was like, I actually felt like I was being pressed down by a rock on top of me, like it was pretty hard. I mean, at 14, everything's hard already, right? Like you got hormones starting to manifest. You start taking interest in romantic relationships, potentially, you start to think about, gosh, what's going to happen when I'm done school, when I'm, off on my own, when I get to exercise this independence. And for me, it was just like, I have no idea. I was scared. I was intimidated and I was depressed, withdrawn. And, just to put this into sort of give you some better context. I'm going to date myself here. Back then we did not have smartphones. Okay. So for those millennials that are listening to this, screw you. But you know what I'm talking about? I didn't have like smartphones, like cameras was a big deal. I mean, you pulled out a freaking brick and you took a photo, right? And then you had to get it processed.
The smartphone didn't exist in the same place.
No. But to match the absurdity of just how little there is documenting of me in that state, because I avoided social settings. I avoided any cameras. I mean, even mirrors. I'd go into the bathroom. I'd be having my shower and I knew I'd have to be toweling off afterwards. I stayed in the shower for a few extra minutes after every shower, turned on the hot water as hot as I could. So all that steam would get the mirror covered in condensation. So I didn't even have to look at myself when I got out of the mirror. I mean, that was life,
Man, that's hard. That's hard. But was it just a gradual decline? Do you wake up in the morning and go, this is it? Or is there one moment? Or is it like a staged...
It is stages.
Transition into this new world, new life?
Yeah, I got to this point at 14 where I was, to be quite frank, entertaining the idea of, life would probably just be a lot easier if I just didn't have to live it. I mean, that's a scary thing. And I'm not trying to make light of this, especially with the month that it is now. Mental Health Awareness Month. Like, it's a big deal. I still struggle with issues. Mental health is always a challenge. But I've learned healthier ways to manage it. I've also learned to bounce back or deal with a little bit less friction so I can manage some of these moments where things become more compoundly difficult, like things become more challenging. And it's usually because of myself, decisions. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But, at 14, I got to that point and I was more afraid of actually staying as I was than I was of the idea of making some changes. So just to frame that up again, I just ultimately got to a point where I was more afraid of not changing than I was of changing.
Yeah, Dai, there's a concept that I talk about, which is it's the change threshold. It's when the pain of doing nothing becomes greater than the pain of doing something.
Love it.
And that's usually that tipping point which is by the sounds of it, what you're talking about here. And your story is really resonating a lot with me from when I was about 14, for a good 5 or 6 years. Same thing. I was probably, if you put it in pounds, probably about 50 pounds heavier than I needed to be. From 17 for like nearly 17 years, I had clinical depression. I got very close, at one point to ending my life. It's a thing that I don't hide because I know other people have been there or might feel that or go there. And the thing is, I actually reached out and got support to help in that sense as well. So I think it's important not to necessarily gloss over that stuff, but
definitely
not that we are, but to really acknowledge the fact that at times it can suck, and you can find it really hard to deal with it.
Absolutely. And it is hard to deal with. And to be honest, at that point in my life, I didn't know how to ask for help. And I got to that place where I realized that I just wasn't going to accept who I was anymore. Now,
I think it's interesting here too, Dai, when you get to there and you get to the conscious bit, which is you consciously want to end and just stop. You want to stop the brain.
Yeah.
But then it's like your brain almost says, look, I'm taking over. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that's what you think, but the animal is going to come out now and it's going to say shush, shush. And you get your support network, you get all of this help. But I feel like when you get there, something takes over your body and your mind, and you get this neurochemical release or something that creates this transition. And it seems that then you do something that's good for you, that releases more of that good stuff into your body, and then you end up on this wave, and that kind of just seems to, you just stay on it, and it's not a huge wave, it's just a nice wave that you can just ride your mal into the beach when you're at the end of a session. Did it feel like that? Like when you finally made that decision that it was something that just you started to crave that little bit?
It's interesting you bring that up because I think we all are looking for little rewards, like we do. There's just the way habits are formed, period, right? We want to reinforce some of the things that we're doing with some sort of positive uplift, whether it be a positive result we're creating, or in my instance, it was making some physical changes, but being able to recognize and really appreciate the contrast of, wow, this thing that was super hard even just weeks ago isn't as hard right now. Not to say it was easy, because it wasn't, but it was.
That's progress.
It was the idea of progress, and a lot of people have talked about this in the psychology space, and those that are into habit change and habit formation and neuro change, they talk about looking for the benefit from the actual changes itself, not necessarily the end result of change. So as they say, enjoy the journey, not just the destination. And for me, I had a destination in mind. I was like, I want a girlfriend, like straight up, straight up.
That dopamine hit,
But straight up, like that was, people say, well, what was the biggest motivation for you? I was like, I just want a girl that wants me, and there's a lot to unpack there. And I've worked with psychologists, I've worked with counselors, and they always like to go back to the origin stories. And when I drop that one, there's a lot of Freudian stuff starts coming out. but the long and short of it all was, I made the decision that I was going to no longer accept being that way. And I had no idea how to make the changes, but I've been witnessing, friends of mine, friends, I use that term loosely because I'd say they were more acquaintances because I didn't allow a lot of people into my life at that point. I was very good at pushing people away, doing things a lot on my own and, avoiding social situations because I didn't like who I was. So showing up and being around people, that was intimidating. And I always believed that everybody was judging me. Always, right? And so avoid it. And
well, they are. I mean, that's the reality in life as well. I mean,
is.
there's as much as you tell your kids and yourself, you know, and you got to ignore it. But the reality is, you do get, you know, we all get judged, and it's our choice there, which is our real selves versus our perceived selves.
That's right.
And no doubt that, you know, in your case, that was a healthy motivator. It's not, you know, it's not a bad thing. But Dai, how do you actually, before that, what's the origins of your name? You've definitely got a unique name.
Dai's a Welsh name for David. And cool. Manuel's a Portuguese last name. So yeah, figure that one out. You know, as I tell everybody,
and you live
I'm Canadian. That's all I got to say. Yeah, you go into Canada, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's always these combinations, right? We're just a blend.
A melting pot. So today, in today's world, you kind of you've obviously got a broad mandate because you know your stuff. You've had a journey. You've obviously got a story to tell across the entire age and gender bracket. But really, you're niching into men and dads and health and well-being around that. And it sounds your journey was more like physical initially into the physical well-being, and it's moved right into a holistic well-being space.
Yeah, I'll admit it. Like, listen, at the early stages, when it came to change, all I was focused on was that exterior physical change. You know, I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to be fit. I wanted to be ripped. You know, I remember I wanted a six pack. I wanted to be desired. And I believe that was the only way to get it.
I still want that. It's 46 years old. It's too late. Is it too late, Dai? Can I do it?
Yes,
or
you
is
can.
It too late?
No, I know. But again, there's a different conversation there. But let's come back to that because I do have some ideas on that. But I think it's looking at how we perceive fitness, right? Like fitness to me was just about the physicality. That's what I always believed it was. And to be, I hate saying this because I know some people think it's very polarizing, but I will contend that I feel the fitness industry is very immature still. I mean, it's a new industry, right? Like really, if you think about it, 50 years ago, there wasn't really a fitness industry. I mean, it was the outliers. It was like these little dungy gyms, you know, with a bunch of steel, like the old Weider and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like you watch like some of their old stuff, and that's what it was. It wasn't mainstream like it is now. And even then, healthy living, the way we refer to well-being and wellness, and even the term mental health, you know, I mean, that wasn't something that was even around 15, 20 years ago. You know, you'd hear it occasionally, but no one really understood it as we do now. And so if I look back, my journey into fitness was all just physicality. So yeah, I didn't do any inner work. And to be honest, I didn't think I needed it. I was very cocky, very ego driven. And, you know, I was just pursuing excellence as far as I could professionally. So I was chasing titles. I was chasing what people would perceive as being successful. And so then I got into retail sales. I opened up a chain of stores with a partner and, you know, but it was all in the fitness industry. And it's broken, man. Like straight up, it's freaking broken. Like it needs to change, right? And so I speak openly about this, but not to. I know I get some hate mail every once in a while, you know, from young personal trainers, and they just don't have.
No, I think it lets people down, right? I think it's like being a psychologist. You do a psychology degree, you pop out at the age of 23 with a master's, and you start, you know, helping people theoretically without the life skills. And I think you see that in the personal training space. Yeah. You come out with your first certificate in training and you're shopped around inside a big Fitness First or these big bulk gyms and they've been given a 46-year-old woman to train up. And it's like, this person is not going to continue their training journey with you. And then you get a trainer who's in their 40s and they've done it for 20 years. And that is transformative. You know, I've had a few of these. Transformative to your life when you come across somebody that connects your life, what you do, their life experience, and the fitness journey. It's not get on this and smash yourself. We got high intensity training, go until you're like you're literally gonna kill yourself because of the training. It's meant to make you feel better.
Yeah. Well, and I, you nailed it on the head there because that's very much the way it is, and it's perpetuated that way. I mean, you look at media, you look at social media, especially. I mean, I don't follow anybody in the fitness space for that given reason. Not to say that they're doing things wrong. It's just that I found that a lot of what was being projected didn't resonate with me, especially where I'm at in life now. I don't find inspiration from a guy pulling up his shirt and showing a six pack. I just, it doesn't inspire me. It doesn't motivate me. I can acknowledge it and say, it takes a lot of work to do that. Good on you. I can acknowledge that. But it doesn't really relate to how I look at life anymore. You know, and this changed early in my 30s because I'll tell you, I had to learn to deal with some of those coping mechanisms. Just like I was when I was morbidly obese, I was able to suppress my emotions, avoid situations that created a lot of stress and would up my anxiety levels. And so I started to exercise a lot, thinking that was the best way to manage it. And it helped. It did help. But it didn't help enough because I learned on, you know, as soon as I got to 17, 18, started getting more attention, started getting opportunities to hang out with certain people, some of the association that I had. Well, you know what? To break down the walls, have a few beers, have a few more. And I found that if I drank and I had a few drinks in me, I could talk to anybody. You know, I could live into who people were perceiving me as because they had this sort of image of me. So there was a perception. And I felt like I started to live into that perception, but it was alcohol fueled. Does that make sense? Like, does that? Yeah. Oh, and that went on for 15 years. And it just got worse. You know, I started having kids, was growing my company, and everybody had this perception of me. Oh, he's got it all together. Look at that life. Look at his family. Wow. And I was a mess. Okay. I was a hot mess. And it came to a point, and this is the reason I had a TEDx talk about a month ago where I shared openly about this moment in my life where everything came crashing down. It was quite literally probably easily the lowest point in my life, you know, and this is just over 11 years ago. And alcohol and narcotics were an everyday thing. And it was my coping mechanism as well as my way to escape a lot of the stress, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the overwhelm that I just felt with life. And
it's like enhanced high performance, isn't it? Not real high performance. It's you're just cash and chips that eventually you're going to break. You're pulling that high tension wire and it's holding, but eventually the bridge is going to come down, right?
It really, I mean, and I hate to say it like this because I don't know if it's true or not, but it felt like it had to. You know, and I'm not trying to imply that it has to come crashing down, but I think it is inevitable at some point, especially the way I was living my life. It was just a matter of time, you know, and there was certain things like, man, I rode off a car and I was able to somehow get out of that. I mean, I fell asleep at the wheel because I had way too much to drink that night. And I went across a ditch, like at a T intersection, woke up inches from a tree trunk, you know, and I'm still amazed I'm alive, but you would have thought that would have been the wake-up call. But no, it wasn't until another 6 months after that I finally made the decision to say, you know what? Maybe the way I'm doing things isn't the best way, you know? And I also started realizing I wasn't being a very good role model, especially to my kids. You know, I have two daughters now in their teens. They're 16 and 18. And at the time, they were both under the age of 6. And I know I was that first role model, that first superhero, to be honest, of what they believed was a strong person, a great human being. You know, in their eyes, I could do no wrong.
I'll just ask one question, then Sean, I'm going to shut up. Sorry, mate. One of the things I want to ask you about that journey is being successful and being successful with that attachment of that lifestyle. How scary was it to think that, to detach that and all the networking and all the connections and everything? How scary was it to go, I'm going to remove that part of my life, but somehow I've still got to figure out how to be successful? I know I had a bit of a journey with that myself. Air Force, heavy drinking culture, super social, hard charged, and then that translates into the way that you run your businesses and you network. For me, I actually had this moment which is like, I'm not sure I know how to be me and do stuff without that. Did you feel like there was a similar journey for you with that, or was it a clean cut?
No. Well, it was clean cut from the standpoint when I made the commitment to my kids and my wife, especially myself, was I'm going to go 1 year without alcohol. Like, it was like, here's my commitment. I know that this is not the healthiest way for me to manage all these negative emotions that I'm dealing with, all this negative self-talk and self-opinions. And I mean, I didn't like me. I mean, that was the bottom line. I didn't like me. And I was avoiding confronting myself, you know, and really taking an inventory of where my life was at, because on paper it looked really good, but in actuality, didn't feel very good. And
is the fact that you didn't like yourself, Dai, was that related to like the image you were projecting was different to who you actually were? There was a
cognitive dissonance,
a mismatching, incongruence.
Yeah, there was definitely incongruence, and I mean, I was very much perceived as a certain individual in the health and wellness space, especially in Canada. And meanwhile, those that really knew me and would see me out and doing those certain things, like it was a clear juxtaposition. Like it was very much opposites, and you can only live that way for so long. And it eventually catches up with you,
I did some work with, I did some hypnotherapy work after 17 years of having clinical depression. And the thing that came out was exactly that I was projecting an identity that was not me. And in 2 sessions, that identity was changed, was removed, that mask was removed. And I've never gone back there again. And it was purely driven by, I believed I was this image that other people had told me that I was. And once I released that, it was like everything looked different. It's like the whole, every aspect of my life changed. It just looked completely different. And it was incredibly liberating to really then look at who I actually was and go, I could actually like this person because I didn't like that person I was before.
I freaking love that, Sean. And I wish I found hypnotherapy 11 years ago, because it probably would have saved me a lot of money for one, but also a lot of growing pains, because it was subjecting myself to grow, because I was still very immature. I was still very focused on the ego and focused on my physicality. And because of my lifestyle choices, my health was declining. It was like my performance was okay, but the overall health was declining. And, I was diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune disease a few years after making these changes. And I'm glad I made those changes, because knowing what I know now about the condition that I have, especially with this.
Can I ask you, mate, what have you got? I have an autoimmune disorder.
Oh, well, hey, we're in the same club. Okay. It's called Autoimmuneneutropenia. And basically what it means is my bone marrow produces lots of white blood cells and other things that are really important for immune function, with the exception that these neutrophils that I create get killed off faster than I can create them. And neutrophils are basically that line of defense. So if you get a cut or a scrape and there's something that goes there to neutralize any bacteria that might get in there or any viruses that might get in there, I don't have that line of defense. As my hematologist would joke, it's like, life would be, just a little bit better if you lived in a bubble. I'm like, thanks, that helps.
Well, COVID, here you go. Here's your gift.
But that was the thing, right? With this year, it's been crazy. For me, someone that I am naturally introverted, but I work as an extrovert by a choice, and so it's very much an 80-20. So it's, 20% extrovert, 80% introverted.
Extroverted because you have to be.
Yes.
Otherwise no one will hear your message, right?
Exactly.
You won't be able to share.
Exactly
the same as my frame.
But I need a lot.
That's so fascinating.
Why?
That's fascinating, Dyke. Because, Sean, this is probably 80%, 90% of the few that we've had on have said that at the end of the day, they're more comfortable with their own company. Oh, yeah. They'd rather not, but everyone realizes, but you got to, because you can't share. And I think that's why people like yourselves, Dai, are so good at explaining things, because you want to spend the minimum amount of time having to reach out and connect. So how can I say it succinctly? Whereas an extrovert will just be like, broadcast. So that's really, I reckon, because Sean and we've got a little bit of a subtext running here, Dai, which is, what is it that makes everyone tick? There must be some common themes between these few.
Right.
And I think introversion is starting to emerge as one of the common themes.
And I think we all have a certain level of that. But I think it's definitely become more prominent in my life the last, I'd say 6-7 years, and especially as I made a career change and, because allowing myself to start doing some of the other work, you know what I mean? Like, I found a great psychologist that I worked with for a few months, and I also worked with a counselor for a little while. And so I started to recognize I needed support. Like I didn't have the resources, at least mentally speaking, and from an understanding standpoint of myself. Like I didn't know how to navigate that. And to be honest, the people that I associated with, they didn't know either. They didn't. Like for them, it was like, I remember like even 2 weeks after I'd made it known, I was like, I'm going a year, no drinking. I'm just going to work on me and I'm just going to learn. I made it very well known, especially, I had a lot of people that were working for me at the time, and it was like, and I was the guy that would be like, oh, let's just go have a quick working lunch, and I'm the one encouraging the consumption, right? Like I'm the one saying, well, let's just buy another round. Because if I bought another round, it meant I could have another drink, so that was how I would operate. So for everybody, it was like, yeah, Dai's saying this, but we'll see if he's actually. I remember 2 weeks in getting a call. Oh yeah, UFC this Friday night. Let's meet at the pub. And I'm like, hey, do you remember what I said last week? Like it didn't register, right? And eventually it got to a point where the phone just wasn't. I wasn't being invited because it was kind of awkward, to be like I'd show up and it was great, early on in the night we're all sort of at the same wavelength. But, I'm drinking my, at that point in time, I was drinking a lot of Diet Pepsi, no plug here, no affiliation. I don't endorse Diet Pepsi. Don't drink it if you do. It's basically because that was what I had to replace the alcohol with. I thought diet soda would be the best way to go. And until it started creating some health issues for me because of the amount I was consuming. Eventually I moved to soda water and lemon. But at that time, I'm at the pub, we're drinking. Yeah, about 2 fights into the night, the conversation is just not connecting. I'm not connecting. And to be honest, people aren't wanting to go to where I was feeling the need to go in the conversation. I was trying to go deeper. I was trying to express more things because now I'm in the space. I'm doing that work. I was like, no one's on the same wavelength than me. And that's where I had to start saying, sheesh, maybe I just need to change my association. And
that's one of the biggest things that we've found in my own journey and with the clients that I work with over time is as you start to go down that journey, you are going to leave some people behind. And that's not that they're bad people or anything. It's just that you start to change, your frequency starts to change and you're resonating at a different frequency now. You're seeking a level of depth that people can't go to. And I know that we touched on just before we started recording the podcast, the context around how important, particularly for men, is to be able to move towards a place of vulnerability. I'd love to hear, when you talked about it, having a passion for that as I do, I'd love to hear a bit more about your take on that and part of that within your journey as well to move towards from the ego in the head to actually being more heart-centered and vulnerable.
Well, thank you. And yes, I can tell like we're right, our stories are so similar, and the neat thing is as we share these, as I'm sure you both have become aware of this, that's the neat thing about vulnerability. I love how Brene Brown sort of frames it. It's not meant for shock and awe. Like that's not why we're sharing these stories. Because if I had my choice, I wouldn't share it. I'm just being honest. Like it's not a comfortable conversation. Not something I'm proud of acknowledging. But it is part of me. It's part of my story. And what I noticed was as I started becoming more open about sharing that. Not just with anybody, because I don't believe everybody deserves our vulnerability. I don't believe that. But I know that as soon as I started sharing, other people started sharing back. Other people started saying, oh man, me too. You have no idea how long I've been dealing with that too. And all of a sudden I realized, holy crap, there's a lot more people that are dealing with this kind of stuff. I had no idea. I just thought, oh, you got to be an alcoholic to go to a meeting. You got to be this, you got to be that. I was so quick to try to fit everything into little nice boxes, give everything a nice little label until I was the one all of a sudden questioning the labels that I had given myself. And I was like, holy, I've got a warped way of looking at things, like very one-sided. And that I didn't like. I didn't like how it made me feel. And I started to question a lot of what I believed. And that put me into that space where I started looking at, well, what's really important to me? Truthfully, not money in the bank, not status, not stuff. I started questioning a lot of the things that I believed I wanted. And
let's look at money in the bank for a second, just before you move on, Dai, because obviously in today's world, one of the themes that jams Instagram and social media channels are private jets and Lamborghinis and all the rest. And I was just doing our own socials this morning, and there was some millionaire blah coming up on my feed about how Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates can't even hold a relationship down with and they're billionaires. And you think about it, and I thought, well, yeah, that's probably why, because they're billionaires. So they probably didn't have any room for anyone else apart from themselves. And And you've been on that journey, right? Like let's be straight up. You were on the out drinking, living the dream. You weren't just opening businesses to not put some coin in the bank, right?
No.
Like I presume money was
absolutely.
was a major motivator during that time.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us your journey about success monetarily versus success mind, body, soul.
Sure. Well, let me put it this way. I got into, I was started off as a trainer. I wasn't very good at it because here I was, that young 20-year-old that was often training people older than him. And I was of the mindset, hey, no pain, you ain't going to gain. Like that. I was the guy.
You're the personal trainer you don't want.
Oh, I was. But I believe that's what people needed. So I'm just going to give people what they need, not what they want. I'm going to give them this. I'm going to get them fit. I'm going to, and I realized I was a really poor personal trainer, both poor as in knowledge set and understanding, but also poor because I just couldn't keep clients, and even times I joked about firing clients because I was like, you're not working hard if you should, and just being bombastic. And I'm like, this is just not who I am. And fortunately, I found myself navigating into equipment sales. And it was my first taste of commission pay structure, a pay structure where there was no ceiling. And based on the amount of people I could help get healthier, I made more money. More people I could help produce great health results, I was going to be rewarded. I was like, wow, this sounds like a good deal. I think I could get into this. And fortunately for me, I had a knack for sales. I picked it up really quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. It's interesting that journey. But I think in your 20s, I mean, my whole 20s were consumed in, wanting to be the best fighter pilot in the world in a massive, high energy, high performing peer group where there was no quarter was given, right? And in some ways, I think there's some benefit in having that focus and harnessing all of that energy, and you don't have enough brain capacity to be thinking esoterically. Maybe that's the journey, but I think, and what I'm really interested to have a chat with you about now is that changes at some point.
Yeah.
And your 40s is a really interesting time, right? In terms of, it's when you start saying, actually, I can't really take that risk because I don't have the time to reverse it. I can't make the mistakes I used to make. I have to stick with it. Or, oh my gosh, I need to throw everything out and start again. And there goes my family. Here comes the Corvette. What are you sort of learning and observing now around men as they start to get into that probably mid 40s and 50s? What are you sort of observing in terms of behaviors, and what are some of your advice and tips to manage this kind of quite confrontational period of a man's life?
Yeah, I like how is it Dr. Wayne? Is it Wayne Dyer? Wayne Dyer. He's written a bunch of stuff, but he has something called the shift. And there's sort of that shift that us as humans, but especially men, I've seen this because I also remember watching my father and some of my uncles and some of the other male figures in my life when I was in my late teens and early 20s, as they were sort of coming into that 40s and 50 range. And just observing what they were going through. And now, being myself and also going through that journey, it's like, oh man, I've seen this all before, and the shift that we experience is one that often goes from, yes, all the stuff, all the things that we've prioritized, especially career, maybe building a family, maybe trying to amass certain things, especially status, that a lot of those ego things, those things that stroke the ego or develop our self-perception of our value. But then we start to shift, or we don't. And I think that's the interesting thing I noted, especially in some of the stuff that I've read and I've observed, is some do shift and some don't. And if we don't, we often see this referred to as the midlife crisis. I remember my dad, right around this time is when he told my mom he's going to be leaving her, and ultimately divorced. And then he fell in love with someone 15 years younger than him, and I don't want to play out any cliches because they're not. My stepmom was a beautiful lady and I love her to death, and I still consider her as a mom, but my father ended up passing away about 4 years ago. And I think this is the thing that really shifted things for me and solidified some of the beliefs that I started forming about 6-7 years ago on this subject you're very much accurate in what you say. When the clock on the wall starts counting down versus count up, and we actually start to recognize that, that's when it's like, oh my gosh, why am I doing some of these things? You know, like I truly believe we all have those questions start to well up in us, where we start questioning some of the things we're doing, especially as 40, 45, 50 starts coming in, where we're thinking, you know, if I go by stats, I've got less than half my life left. You know, if you base it on the average male lives to be 79 years old in most developed countries. Like, man, I'm past halfway. Like, do I want to be living my second half of life anywhere like I would live my first half? Well, I don't know. You know, some of those, I had about 12 years there. I quite honestly don't remember a lot of, but I do remember doing some things, only because Facebook tells me. But other than that, you know, like it's a big change.
That must be why more old people use Facebook than young people, just to jog their memory.
Hey man, I do all the time. I'm looking, this is where I was last year, 5 years ago. Oh, interesting. You know, but this shift that we start to experience, I think either we accept or we don't. And what I've noticed, especially with my father passing, that was a big wake-up call for me. You know, he suffered from pancreatic cancer. That's ultimately what he died from, and some complications from that, obviously. But for about 10 years leading up to that moment when he finally passed, he was just riddled with health challenges. You know, like he got late onset diabetes. You know, a lot of that was lifestyle based. See, my dad was the kind of guy, you see him, you just think, man, healthy dude. You know, he died at 72, a young 72. Like most people would never think he was in his 70s. He looked quite young and he was active. But he had certain lifestyle choices that he lived for a long time. And trying to undo that in a very quick turnaround doesn't necessarily happen. As I shared with you right at the beginning, you know, that state of unhealth doesn't just happen overnight. Usually there's been some signs. There's usually been a couple things we've experienced. There's some bells that have started going off in our head. But we're very good at sort of dismissing or ignoring until we can't. And watching my father go through that, he was very successful, like very, very successful. And you know, I learned a lot just by watching him and how he lived his life. And especially when it came to business, you know, he was just very aggressive and built his own practice and was just successful. And then he sold it. And then it was nothing but health challenges. And I was like, holy crap. He worked so hard to build that. He had a great life building it within reason, you know, like obviously there was a lot of challenges too, but he built something of substance and changed a lot of people, helped people quite a bit. And yet it you know, was it for nothing? I don't know. Like,
do you think that's one of the world's biggest cons? Retirement is like the biggest con out there. Do all this work, save all this money, and then stop. I
look at Ikigai, right, in Japan, and I don't know if you guys have checked out like the Blue Zone, some of Dan Butner's research around, you know, these 5 populations of people that are living to be 100 or older, but like not like, I mean, I'll in Canada, if you see someone 100 or above, they're usually in an assisted living home. They're usually waiting a lot, right? Like it's not like they're out there kicking ass and taking names, right? Like they're just sort of waiting, and there's very few. It's not a very big population of those people. And yet here's these 5 places around the world where they're completely outliers, but there's got to be some similarities. And, you know, he went and did some research where he found that there's these 9 recurring themes, and they're all free, accessible lifestyle decisions. Like these people aren't paying hundreds of dollars to go join certain gyms and to work with trainers and coaches. Like, they just have a great, strong connection with community, with self. They got a deep sense of purpose for their life. They're active every day. They don't overeat. They eat whole foods. Like, you know, when we say all this stuff and it's like, whoa, that sounds like pretty smart. That doesn't sound very hard to do. And yet, you know, I look at my dad's decisions, you know, his choice around nutrition at times and alcohol consumption and stress management and mental health challenges. And it's like, oh man, why did he even retire? Like, maybe he should have just kept working. Because in Japan, they got something called Ikigai. And I've been told that there's no Japanese term for retirement. Now, whether that's true or not, at least the way we understand it, because it's believed that when you're doing the things that you love, why would you ever stop?
So I've got an example with my grandfather. He passed away 4 years ago at 98.
Oh,
now, he was a very young. At 95, he was ballroom dancing with all the 60-year-old, 65-year-old women. So he
love it.
But as from the moment I remember him, so I'm 46, right? Yeah. So the moment I remember him, maybe 2 or 3, he was already retired. He retired at 55, And he was retired his whole life. But what he did was he didn't overeat.
Yeah.
He was always active. He lived on a house that was like on a steep block like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
He bought an inclinator thing, like a lift thing for my grandmother, but he'd put his tools on it and walk up and down the stairs. He goes, well, if I don't walk up the stairs, I'm not going to be fit. So he'd put his tools on it, press the button, then he'd walk up the stairs. Right? So all day he was up and down the stairs. And what he loved the most was his garden. Like he would just like always be out in his garden, planting flowers and trimming things. And but he was always going out to be social and connect. And yeah, at 96, he looked like some 76-year-old. You know,
it's amazing, isn't it?
Interacted.
And
you know, it was that small, consistent, nothing extreme, but just small, consistent, good choices day to day. And it's such an important thing. And I actually would like to just step back a little bit, from what we talked about a bit before, that concept of that transition, particularly for men, between the kind of the ages of 40 and 50, 55.
Yeah.
There's a great book. I can't remember the author's name, but it's called The Death of the Ego and the Birth of the Soul. And in that book, it talks about how it's basically moving from head to heart. It's going from the materialism, from the dollars, from the stuff, from the, I need to be known as this CEO or have this and have that, and it's all external. It's all external stuff. But then moving towards an internal, I guess, sense of peace. And that's one of the hardest journeys that we can go on. And it's why there's such a spike in suicide rate in men in between 40 to 50 is because of that journey, and because people don't understand what it is. They don't understand what's happening. And there's not a lot of, I guess, knowledge. And in a lot of, ancient communities and stuff, they had transitional periods where they would actually take people through that journey because they knew that journey was coming. So they had these rites of passage at different points in people's lives to progress them from one stage to the next. But in, I suppose, Western society, we don't have that. We don't have kids, going through a rite of passage to now be classed as an adult. They don't go away for 6 months and hunt with the men and then come back and be seen as a warrior and a man. It's just this kind of path that's continuous. I suppose psychologically, we've lost some of those elements that actually make us human and that actually help us thrive as humans as well. But it is definitely something that we've, that, as I said, I wanted to cover that because it really is a good book to understand if people are going through a challenging period, to understand what's going on. And I read that a few years ago, and it really highlighted the journey I'd been on and the journey I was going through, and that of many friends as well around a similar age.
I have not heard of that book, but I am totally going to download it after this. So it's I appreciate the recommendation.
I'll make sure we put the author in the show notes as well, so that people can find it.
Because I think it's more than just the outlier, right? The one person that sort of breaks the mold. I honestly feel it's much bigger than that, but these stories aren't often told, and they're not role models. We're just not really aware that there's even an option to do that. I mean, and I think about my own experience, right? Like I left a career of 17 years as a partner of a company that I co-founded, and I left at the wrong time. It wasn't a good time to exit of a company. Is it ever really? I don't know. Again, that's up for debate, but
they're like a relationship.
It is, right?
Yeah. When it's yours.
Yeah. And yet I just wasn't feeling fulfilled. I had, so this is, I don't know if you guys might appreciate this. So here I am, I hit burnout big time at this point. So I had given up alcohol. I started doing all this inner work. Started questioning some of my associations. So I started looking for some new association. And so, I'm changing a lot at this point. I was so focused on professional development. Now I shifted into personal development, especially more inner work type stuff.
Evolved, mate. Evolved.
There we go.
Not changed, evolved.
Thank
I reckon
you.
is the word to move forward with.
I like that. Okay. So I was starting to evolve. And as I was evolving, I started to realize that, gosh, this path that I'm on, doesn't really feel like I'm supposed to be here anymore. And but that's kind of scary because I thought, I had finally made it. Like, this is what I've been working for. And I'm finally at that point where, everything's just sort of clicking. And yet I don't feel happy. I don't feel fulfilled. And I actually felt strained. I started not enjoying doing the work that I was doing. Like, I really wasn't enjoying it at all. And meanwhile, all the things I was doing on the side, as people talk about their side hustles or side projects, and I was doing a lot of stuff, especially community work. really trying to service and build different types of communities, both online and offline, just ways to connect with people, create an impact, help. I often think about the hero's journey, and that the full circle aspects of the hero's journey. You go through these changes, and what do you want to do? You now want to help other people do those same changes. You want to come back to where you started. And so here I was trying to do this, and I wrote a personal manifesto. I hit burnout, and my partner, it was like, you know what, just take a few weeks and just take off and go just look after you. And I thought, wow, this is great. I'll go visit my folks out in Toronto. So I left Vancouver. On that flight, about a 5-hour flight, I just wrote. And I wrote my own personal manifesto. I felt like it was, have you guys seen the movie Jerry Maguire? Do you guys remember that movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It was my Jerry Maguire moment. Okay. I wrote out a personal manifesto of all these things that I wanted to accomplish before I hit 45. So like this would have been about 10 years. It will be 10 years next year. And so here I was writing out all these pages, and it ended up being, once I finally typed it out, it was about 14 pages long. Like a lot of goals, a lot of things I wanted to do, but also shifts that I wanted to start making in the fitness and wellness industries, things I wanted to see change. I brought it back and I shared it with my business partner, who at the time was the CEO, and he was my first true business, and I'd even go as far as to say a life mentor, because he was 20 years my senior. So I started working with him in my early 20s. And, then we got into this company together, and it was just, I learned a lot from him. But he didn't read it. And I was like, whoa. Here's that first real strong male figure in my life. I'd go as far as say he knew me way better than my dad knew me. Because it was, as an adult, it was like the only real father figure as well as role model that I spent a lot of time with. Often there was weeks I'd spend more time with him than my family, and he didn't read it. And I was like, I was gutted, absolutely gutted. I was just like, whoa, I was excited to share it. I was fired up. I was like, this is how we can change the industry. This is all the stuff we're going to do. But here's also some things I want to do. And just completely dismissed. And that was when I realized that, this path I'm on, it's not meant for me anymore. But that was scary as hell, because I was like, this is all I've known. It provides my family with a great income and safety. I think about Maslow, that bottom of the pyramid's looked after really well by this career option, and here it was, this big gaping hole. And so I shared that with my wife. We talked about it. She'd been dripping on me about leaving, about let's just go do something else. Let's go travel as a family. Let's be a full-time family. And I was like, lady, you're crazy. This is nuts. There's no way. Like, honestly, like I was a dick. Okay. I was just like, you're nuts. There's no way we're ever going to do that. But after that incident of not reading my manifesto, not acknowledging some of my dreams and ambitions and vision of where I wanted to go, I was like, you know what? I'm kind of open to these other ideas now. Maybe that's a good idea. And she just kept sending me little podcasts, like these traveling families, these nomadic individuals that were just off living their life, but location independent. And I was like, okay, well, maybe we can do this. And then that maybe just kept building. Gave notice, gave them almost, I guess it was close to 18 months notice, because I was in obviously quite an integral role within the company. So I wanted to make sure there was lots of lead time to replace me and put things in place. I wanted to leave on a good note. And then I left. And I had no idea where we were going. I literally quit my career. A month later, my wife quit hers. A few months after that, we pulled the kids out of school, gave away all our stuff, packed up the SUV, and just started traveling with no plan B, no idea of what we were going to do. But I at least started building some income online. I'd been doing some speaking. So I had some side hustles that were bringing in just enough that we could at least sustain that travel side of things for a little while. And that was what started this last 6 years. Has just been like crazy. Like the amount of stuff that I've packed in the last 6 years is more than I'd done in the previous 15. Like really from a life experience and growth standpoint, or as you said, evolution standpoint, And, but I all think it all came down to me having to get to that point and being like, what the hell do I want to do with my life? Like, really, what do I want? And I mean, how often are we even asked that question? Like, how often? And
you don't want to unpack it. You don't want to know.
Hell no. Like, I want to watch Netflix. Thank you. And if you ask me what I want on pizza tonight, I could tell you that. But ask me what I want for my life, forget about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
It's interesting the synchronicities or the similarities because I went and traveled for a year, packed everything up, sold most of the stuff 3 years ago, and did that because there were things in my life that just weren't meshing. I stepped back out of a number of businesses. I changed a lot of stuff, and
I got divorced. I thought that instead.
And it created the basis of change that I'm now experiencing now, 3 years later, and it was an incredible experience to do that. It's been an amazingly deep and powerful conversation so far. I'd love to understand though. You've clearly done a lot of the work. You've clearly stepped into that space where you're one of the few people who is actually living, purpose, passion. This strong self leader showing up. If you were to take a piece of advice,
hang on. I know where you're going. I know where Sean's going with this, but there's this one thing that.
Okay, I'll pause that.
Yeah, pause, because Dai said he'd come back to something, and I would like to go there.
Yeah.
How do I get the 46-year-old man six pack?
That's the most important question.
All right, let me put it this way.
All right, shh.
Okay.
Cut. This is all we're going to put in. This is all we're putting in the podcast.
Yeah. All right.
Do the work.
You're going to fuel to thrive, and you're going to move your body every day with purpose. Okay? Like, I know that sounds like so stupid simple, but when I say fuel to thrive, it's really just taking note of what you eat every day and just start to create a relationship with your food. Like, literally start to take into account, like, just some regular self-talk, 30, 60, 90 minutes after you've eaten, and just check in with yourself to ask, how am I feeling? If you feel like you got to eat again, or you feel like you need to take a nap, chances are what you ate earlier wasn't the right mix for you, and there's a little piece on this.
Is that like metabolic matching your diet, or
there's
different
lots of,
like...
see, this is the thing about nutrition. There's a lot of opinions out there, and I'm a big believer that majority of them have validity to it. But the problem is we're all so different. And yet we do have very similar aspects to just how we are, because we're all human beings. And yes, we have certain anatomy and certain function. However, based on lifestyle choices and the way we've lived our lives, we're all very different. And this is where we start leaning into more like the conversation around epigenetics and specifically what lifestyle decisions and choices we've made up to this point in our lives. How does it influence certain functions in our body, whether it be hormonal health, whether it be our metabolic health, even right down to how we deal with the stresses in the world, like both realized, like the ones that are actually there, like secondhand smoke, like pollution, to right down to the ones that we subject ourselves to, right? Like with the types of foods that we decide to eat, and some of the liquids that we decide to consume, and so if we start to have just a more awareness around how we fuel ourselves, it's the best place to start. So it's really, that's where I like to begin, because there's lots of different paths we can go down. I could say, hey, do this, like I love following something called the zone diet. It has been repackaged many, many times. People sometimes refer to it as if it fits your macros. I don't know if you've heard that term, but we start talking about proteins, carbs, fats. It's all about trying to balance it in the right mix. And if you can balance in the right mix, you get your metabolism cranking all the time. You're literally fueling yourself to thrive, not simply survive, and but there's so many different ways, right? You can maybe look at the carnivore diet, you can look at the paleo diet, you can look at the Atkins diet. I mean, there's so many freaking diets. Diet just means the way you eat, like
it's awesome though.
Yeah.
It's awesome though, you sit there and provide the context to all of that. And I think one of the challenges when experts market diets, it's a bit like, this car is fit for every purpose, no matter whether you're single or whether you've got a family of 8. This car is the best car. It's the shiniest car. And it might be. But I love that. And so because this is the thing, right? I think, and Sean, we've seen this, is context is so important for people. And most people run around with zero context in life. They've just big ideas and dreams, but the complexity of pulling that all together around context and different aspects of your life. You kind of have a little bit of context there. You could talk about having some pillars or having a little bit of, like, what are like 2 or 3 things people can hang their hat on in order to start building some awareness
all right,
around this journey? Thank you.
Here's the first one. And this goes for anybody. There's a few things that I know to be absolutely true. And it's undeniable. I don't think I can ever, I've never had anybody challenge it to the point to tell me I'm wrong. And so here it goes. I've never whether it be a client, a friend, just someone I've connected with on social and offered a couple of little tidbits, of information that would be useful. I've never had anybody reach back to me and say, Dai, so I took your idea. I had this nice big luscious salad with some cedar plank salmon on it for lunch. I really regret doing that. Okay. or, I have a client and, at the end of the day, I'm checking in with them. It's like, hey, how did the workout go today? And it's like, oh, it went pretty well. I really regret doing it though, Dai. There's certain things that we just never, ever regret. Do more of those, okay? And so when you look at certain things, like when you eat certain types of food, there's a certain fulfillment you get from it, and really just start to take stock on what foods those are. What are the foods that keep you going well, keep you focused, keep your energy in a great place, And
I think Dai, one of the things you said was about awareness.
Yes.
Right. And I think, I've seen my journey over the last, say, 5 years or so. Got back into running about 12 years ago. And then 5 years ago, I really started intermittent fasting, started to be more aware of what I was eating. Still not as good as it could have been. But really, I had and again, this is that thing about the time I started to count down, at 46. I had spinal surgery on my neck last year. And it required me to do some rehab because I lost
from holding the weight of the world up.
That was it.
Eventually, you got to get that fixed.
Eventually, something goes wrong. So it meant that I lost about 40% muscle mass in my right arm.
Wow.
Right? So, and I'd never really done any upper body work or anything like that at all. I just ran. I love running. It's very meditative for me, and I just really enjoy it. But so I had to start doing this rehab routine. And what I started to do was like, okay, well, I'm doing this every day. What if I add in some push-ups? What if I add in some weights? And so for the last sort of 5 months, I've been doing that. I've done it. I've missed one day out of 169 days.
Nice.
Right. And I just do this 25-minute session pretty much about 25 minutes. And what I've noticed is that now I'm 46 now. I am the fittest, the strongest, and the slimmest that I've been since I was 23.
And most handsome, mate.
Thank you.
Definitely.
It must be the grey. And
silver fox you.
That's it. But what I noticed was it's all been based on awareness. Now, in the last month, I've become consciously aware more so, and I've actually opted now for a predominantly vegetarian diet. Now, I never thought those words would ever come out of my mouth in a million years, like even 3 months ago. But I've actually just started doing it. It's like, there's this whole other new world of things that I can eat and how I'm feeling, the awareness of how I'm feeling because of that. It's my state has lifted. My mind is clearer. My ability to think, my ability to deal with stress has changed, right? And it's about being aware of our state. As you said, once you eat, if you need to feel like you're going to fall asleep, and I haven't had something like a hot chocolate for probably 4 or 5 months, maybe 6 months. I had one yesterday and I went, and I'm like, okay, I'm not doing that again. Because straight away I was just like, I just felt my state drop. And it's like, okay, that's clearly not something that agrees with me. I very rarely have milk, but it's clearly not something that's agreeing with me. So again, I think that's the key too that I've found is you've got to be aware. Yes, you've got to have the data, the information about whether it's a particular style of diet or a intermittent fasting or an exercise routine, but you've got to be aware of how it's making you feel in the moment. As you said, it's not a goal. It's how's it make me feel right now? Like an hour after I ate that, I feel really strong. I'm really clear. Or am I like cathartic and like, what is it? Really, flat and slow. It's such an important part of it.
And then I think what happens is you get into a loop, and if you're not careful, you go, "Oh, that's because I'm getting older. That's because
it's escape."
So I think
an excuse loop.
Well, it's easy to point the finger at age. I know that, but then there's these outliers of people that just do amazing things, and I think about Rich Roll. I mean, it's pretty extreme what he did, obviously, but still, he was like mid to late 40s when he made that decision. What was he smoking, like a pack a day and drinking, and just, I mean, his story is pretty inspiring, right? And yet here he is, and he's made this big change, massive transformation. But he's not alone in that. There's some amazing stories out there of people that make these shifts and thrive.
Choice.
And I think it's finding those stories. That's why I love what you guys do, because you highlight a lot of these stories. You amass these amazing learnings and then just share them. pass down the story, right? It's how we all learn and get inspired to hopefully make some changes. And outside of the awareness piece, I always like to encourage people, it's strength or resistance training for sure. From a physicality standpoint.
I find that as you get older for sure.
It's muscle mass, you just don't want to lose it. Whatever you got, you want to fight to keep it as long as you can. Because if you just look at issues for people as they age, there's a really tight correlation between muscle mass, metabolic health, as well as death. Okay. And when the one's declining, we see the increase of death go up, right? This is not new stuff. There's people far smarter than me and with alphabet soup after their name that have figured all this stuff out. And the information's out there. It's just a matter of, do we tap into it, And so if you can maintain your muscle mass, it is wonderful. Maintain that strength, that base of strength. And if you don't have a good base of strength, no time like now to start building it back up,
And you can do it. You can do it tomorrow. You can right build now. Strength anytime in your life, right?
Yeah, anytime. But again, recognize, and this, yes, maybe age, this will come into play a little bit, is depending on the type of life we've lived to whatever age we were at, there's certain things that have been reinforced, certain patterns, especially movement patterns, which will probably need to be taken into account. And that's why I usually say, go see a movement specialist, somebody that really understands how the human body moves, because you're going to have to make some subtle changes when you're first integrating new strength routines.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
My autoimmune disorder is called ankylosing spondylitis, and it's a skeletal problem.
Yeah.
And over, I really got into training. I dropped out of it about a year ago. This has been my whole mind's like, stop making excuses to go tomorrow. But it was a good 3 years. I had a physiotherapist that decided to give away physiotherapy and become a trainer. And the first 6 months was movement, wasn't mass, it wasn't weight, it was postural, it was all the small muscles, a lot of band movements, just getting the body to move how it should. And then when that was stable and moving right, then stack the weights on. And then it was like, man, I was benching weights I'd never even imagined, and I'm 43, more than I was benching as a kid. And I was and there was no pain, there was no uncomfortableness there. So I think that there's a real little gem is if you're 40 in your don't go to a 20-year-old trainer, because they're going to break you.
Don't, unless they've got a kines background and they understand just what it's like. But I know they'll, as much as they understand it, in theory, it's completely different in practicality, right? We can all say that, being that we're all in our 40s. It's just so different. But I am fitter now than I was in my 20s. And I think that's just something that you've both just echoed as well. But it's just, we've had to change how we do things. But the results, I find actually, we have a bit more patience when we age, right? We just are. We don't take ourselves so seriously anymore. At least I don't. And at the end of the day, I look at how I trained before and how I train now. It's very different, but I still enjoy it. At least how it makes me feel after the fact. I'll be honest, hey, on the top of my list every day, it's not to go work out. It's not. But it's my general maintenance, and I know it makes everything else that I do way better. And so it's because of that connection, it's easy to do. And so just to close out, I know you asked me for 3 things. So the first one, being aware, working on your mindfulness, and especially just look at the choices that you're making from a nutrition standpoint. That's because you got to do that every day, all day. Right? You're always eating. So, get that piece figured out, because you'll be doing that for the rest of your life anyways. So might as well figure out what works best for you now. The earlier you learn it, the better you'll be for it. Second to that, resistance training. But make sure you work with somebody that understands movement and understands how to analyze your body. Because, like you were saying, Sean, I'm sure that there was some sort of shoulder impingement there or something, that was limiting your ability to move that arm, and hence it atrophied because it wasn't being used. And these are things that can be corrected, but you need to work with somebody that knows what they're doing, And then thirdly, it's all about mindset. If you're not connecting, if you're not feeling very motivated, get around people that are. It's the easiest way, and you get motivated through osmosis, to be honest. That's what I've experienced. Yeah, get a community of people that are interested in similar things, want similar things to you. Oh man, because on those days where, trust me, it's a lot easier to stay in bed than it is to get up and go for a run. it's nice knowing that, oh, I know my buddy who's living across town. We may not be running together, but I know he's going to get up. He's going to be texting me in 5 minutes to say, hey, how's the run going?
Yeah.
You know, like it's like, I'm like, you're a dick, but I'm going to be there, you know, like, but it's amazing what happens. Right. But those are 3 things that I think, you know, and just to throw a stat out there and not to, you know,
I love stats.
Well,
hey, man,
okay.
I love stats.
Okay.
So throw them out.
Good. All right. Well, because we've been talking about this vulnerability piece, and just as us as men who have been, you know, either finding ourselves in the shift or experiencing the result of making the shift, there's a stat that came out from a research paper that was done in partnership with Movember Project, and this was done out of the UK, and so they surveyed all these men, 20 and above, and what they found was they asked some basic questions. And the question that really jumped out at me out of the survey that they asked was, how many men, if any, would they be willing to share serious conversations around topics like money, health, relationships? Like literally, how many other men would they be willing to have those conversations with? But they were men that were outside your home. So no family, no one that you live with. Like it's outside of your sort of inner circle. How many do you talk to? 51% said 2 or fewer men to talk to and connect on this. But 1 in 8 said 0, none. And this is especially as they got to 35 and above. Like that's amazing. You know, in their 20s, the numbers were a little bit higher, but as we got to 35 to 45 to above, that number was going down and down and down. We just don't have these communities. We don't have these connections. We don't have these serious people that we feel that we can be vulnerable with and share some of the stresses that we're working through. You know, and I think that is a challenge that we're all either dealing with right now or we're going to, unless we're aware of it and we do something to actually combat it. Do you know what I mean? Like actually find that community, find that inner circle, or develop deeper friendships with people that you can have for the rest of your life. You know, like
nice product drop there, by the way. Yeah, I like that.
What was that?
Inner circle. Did you see that?
Inner circle.
Yeah, because my group's called the
Inner Circle. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I saw that online. Yes, there you go. So your inner circle there. Join Sean's inner circle and.
I know how this podcast is going to roll out. Yeah. That's right. Sean's bringing the guests before we come on the show.
So you seeded it in there really cleverly.
I love it.
No,
all right, Sean, your question, mate. All right.
Just before I wrap that up, though, you know, it's a great point, Dai, that you say. I mean, and that's that thing that, you know, when they do the when they've, I can't remember, there's a study done and, you know, or a survey done of people as they reach the end of their lives, and the things that people regretted. The number one thing was, you know, not spending enough time with people they cared about, and that's so important.
That was an Australian, right? Bronnie Ware, I think. Bronnie Ware, the 5 Regrets of the Dying. My God, that was one of the most, when my dad was going through sort of that end of life period. And I'm very fortunate, you know, like I think about the choices that we've made. Had I not left my career a few years prior to that, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be with my family, be around my dad during those last 6 months. Like, so it's weird how sometimes these decisions, big, scary decisions, actually open up some pretty amazing doors for us. And we just don't even realize it in the moment, right? And, but when I discovered her, everything shifted. And so I love that you brought that up, because I think, you know, in juxtaposition to what I was talking about, you know, the people that live to be 100 that are thriving in these blue zones. Meanwhile, you have people not even making it to their 70s, nothing, filled with regret at that end of life. It's like, whoa, these are 2 very different ends, different sides of the coin here. It's like, I know what side I want to be on. You know? Yeah, it's
awesome,
incredible.
But mate, I'm sure we can talk all day.
I know.
I'm about to get kicked
in
out of
the
the
essence,
studio.
we've got to get kicked out of the studio. But the last question I want to ask is if knowing what you know now, if you were to take a piece of advice that you know, what piece of advice would you share with that younger version of yourself who was struggling, who was challenged, you know, who was overweight, who didn't know what was in store, what was coming?
You're enough right now, and you're worth the change. I often think about this. You know, maybe not this question that same way, but I often think about that inner child, that little boy that I was, and how bad he was hurting. You know, and oh gosh, and I used to question just my value, you know, all the time, and I would like him to know that, man, you're worth it. You're worth everything, and stop discounting yourself, because, geez, it's annoying, But yeah, that's definitely the biggest one I would like to put out there for everybody. It's like, geez, you are enough.
You're definitely also speaking to the 14-year-old version of me too. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
But thank you, Dai. I really, really appreciate your time today, and it's been an incredible conversation. Just thank you for sharing your story openly, vulnerably, for coming out the other side of the ego and moving towards the soul and the heart-centered approach. It's really, really refreshing.
That was an awesome journey. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Christian. Or Boo. I guess we'll go Boo. I want to know. So is that because of your last name? Is that the short?
Yeah.
Okay.
Boo. And it's when I was in the Air Force, my call sign, it just stuck ever since. So.
Got it.
Goose was already taken. Goose was already taken. So,
We'll talk. I'm sure we'll cross paths again, Dai.
Sure.
We're going to have all Dai's links in the podcast after the show. And for me right now, Dai, what's resonating is context. If you're looking for that context and you need to draw the dots and make it make sense for you, man, reach out to Dai. I think it's going to be evolutionary. And that wraps up another episode of The Few. Thank you to our partners, Afterburner, for team building, development, and alignment. We understand now how important it is to have the right people around you. Get them on board with where you want to go. Momentum Media, the largest industry publisher in the country, connecting your business to the Australian community. ICMI, Australia's premier speaker bureau, representing the few that do fulfill their life's purpose. And finally, Sean's Inner Circle, the business coaching organisation for small and medium enterprises looking to make that next step. Thanks again for listening in and downloading today. Please leave a review on whatever platform you are currently listening to this podcast, and reach out to our partners who can help you make the transition to the few.
and look him up on TED as well. TED Talk was really, really powerful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you again, Dai.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Take care.